What's going on, everyone? Welcome to CyberBeat. So today in this project, I'll be demonstrating how open source intelligence, or OSINT, can be used in Maltego to gather publicly available information on a Fortune 500 company and one of its executive leaders. The goal for this assignment is to show how an attacker can use passive reconnaissance to identify infrastructure, external service providers, and human targets, then use that information to support a simulated spear phishing scenario. At this stage, I'm operating in the passive reconnaissance phase of cyber operations, meaning all information is collected from public sources and no direct interaction with the target systems have taken place. I began by identifying the primary target domain, which is target.com. This serves as a starting point for the Maltego investigation because the domain can be expanded to reveal infrastructure relationships such as DNS records, email routing, and external service providers. Starting with the domain is important because it gives a foundation for mapping the organization's public-facing technical footprint. Next, I ran DNS-related transforms to identify mail exchange and name server records. The MX records show how the organization handles email, while the NS records identifies the infrastructure supporting DNS resolution. In this case, the results show that Target relies on external providers instead of managing everything internally. This is important from an attacker's perspective because third-party services can increase the overall external attack surface and may provide additional opportunities for reconnaissance or impersonation. From here, I pivoted from the domain and mail infrastructure to identify associated IP address information. This step helps determine where services are hosted and what systems are exposed through public infrastructure. IP resolution is a key part of OSINT because it connects the domain to actual technical assets that can later be analyzed for ownership, hosting, and related source services. Here I expanded the IP related data to identify additional relationships tied to the infrastructure. At this point, Maltego begins correlating information from multiple transforms, which helps build a larger picture of how the target's public infrastructure is organized. This step is used because a single IP address often leads to broader infrastructure intelligence and can reveal whether the organization is relying on third-party vendors. In this view, I conducted a deeper analysis of the IP address and gathered infrastructure-related data. This includes ownership and registration details, which help identify the organization or service provider behind the asset. This matters because attackers are not just looking for systems, they are looking for relationships, ownership, and dependencies that can be exploited indirectly. This expanded graph shows how one of the infrastructure points can lead to multiple additional data points, including contact information, locations, and other linked entities. The value of this type of analysis is that it turns passive reconnaissance into a structured intelligence picture. Instead of isolated data, I now have a connected map showing how several components relate to one another. By continuing to expand the infrastructure, I was able to identify even more linked entities associated with the environment. This reinforces how passive reconnaissance can uncover a broader ecosystem surrounding the target. For a penetration testing team, this kind of mapping is useful because it helps define the attack surface before moving into active reconnaissance. One of the key findings from the infrastructure analysis is that the email-related IP data points back to proof point. That indicates the target is using a third-party provider for email security or email handling. This is significant because it shows that the organization's attack surface includes vendor dependencies, and it also gives attackers useful context for crafting believable phishing emails that reference email security updates or access control changes. Another major finding is that Target is using Akamai, which indicates the use of a content delivery and DNS protection service. This kind of architecture helps mask backend systems, and it makes it harder to directly identify origin servers. From a defensive perspective, that is a good control. From an attacker's perspective, it means the focus may shift away from direct infrastructure attacks and more toward human-centered attacks like phishing. After assessing the technical infrastructure, I introduced a human target into the investigation, Brian Cornell, who is CEO of Target. Identifying a C-suite executive is important because executives can be targeted directly, or their name and authority can be leveraged to make phishing emails appear more legitimate. This is where OSINT investigation shifts from technical intelligence to human intelligence. Using search-based OSINT transforms in Maltego, I searched for publicly available information related to Brian Cornell. This returned references from news sources, websites, and online platforms associated with his public presence. This type of information is valuable because it helps an attacker understand how the executive is presented publicly, what platforms mention him, and what language or context might make a phishing email more believable. The screenshot shows the collected web-based OSINT associated with Brian Cornell. As shown here, Maltego was able to identify multiple online references, including media outlets, corporate pages, social platforms, and other public-facing sources. This demonstrates how easy it is to build a profile on a high-level executive using only publicly available information. Even though I did not uncover direct private contact information, I gathered enough contextual intelligence to support a targeted social engineering scenario. In this step, I refined the search using domain-related properties and specific keywords connected to the target and its executive leadership. This helps narrow down which sources are most relevant and allows me to identify domains associated with those search results. From an attacker's perspective, this process helps identify trusted platforms and sources that can be mimicked in a phishing attempt. I also attempted to identify email information for Brian Cornell using PGP-based transforms, but no results were returned. That is not unusual for a high-level executive, and it does not prevent social engineering. In fact, this highlights an important point in OSINT. Attackers do not always need a direct executive email address. They often only need enough public information to make a message look credible to another employee inside the organization. Using the information gathered during the passive reconnaissance phase, I created a simulated spear phishing email. This email references executive leadership, including CEO Brian Cornell, and uses language related to security updates, account verification, and urgency. It also includes a realistic-looking but non-functional verification link. The purpose of this simulation is to demonstrate how publicly available information can be weaponized in a social engineering scenario. This type of message could be effective because it uses authority, urgency, and familiarity with organizational processes to pressure the recipient into action. The email is addressed to a generic employee account because this is a simulated attack for educational purposes only and is not intended to target any real individual. Even without a confirmed employee address, attackers often rely on common naming conventions or placeholder formats when designing a phishing campaign. The main purpose here is to demonstrate how OSINT findings can directly support a believable phishing pretext. Overall, this passive reconnaissance effort revealed several important components of the target's attack surface. First, the organization relies on third-party infrastructure providers for DNS, content delivery, and email-related services. Second, publicly available information about executive leadership can be easily gathered and correlated. Third, this combination of technical and human intelligence creates a strong foundation for targeted social engineering attacks, even without directly touching the target environment. From a Christian and ethical perspective, this type of activity must always be conducted with integrity, authorization, and the intent to protect rather than harm. Penetration testing is only ethical when it is approved and performed within legal boundaries. Unauthorized access or deception outside of that scope would violate both professional ethics and legal standards. In conclusion, this project demonstrates how OSINT can be used to map a target organization's infrastructure, identify executive leadership, and support a realistic spear phishing scenario using only publicly available information. Thank you all for watching, and have a great night.